Welcome back to another episode of Built and Backed. Joining me today is Alex Benik, the founder of Encoded Ventures, an early stage venture fund investing in the next generation of cloud, data, and security infrastructure. Before launching Encoded Ventures, Alex spent more than 2 decades at Battery Ventures, where he focused on enterprise infrastructure and cybersecurity investments and partnered with founders from early stage through IPO. Alex, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ashley.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I'm excited to have you on and would love to have you start off by sharing with our listeners more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm Alex. I am a solo GP, which is a fancy way of saying I work by myself, and run Encoded Ventures, which is a $18 million seed pre-seed fund. As you mentioned, before that, I spent over 20 years at Battery. So Encoded is actually my third job ever. I had one before that in Boston after college doing consulting and market research on telecom and networking things. And before that, went to college in Connecticut, grew up in Rhode Island, so a New England boy.
Awesome. And I would love to hear what made you want to go off on your own and start Encoded after you were at Battery.
Yeah, for sure. I think I started Battery. Actually, I started living in the Bay Area. So I was in the Bay Area from 2000, mid 2000, started Battery the beginning of 2001 and was out there through 2008. And, over the course of years, I started at Battery and Battery's sixth fund. They're currently investing out of 14th fund. So the fund has obviously grown quite a bit. Um, and has grown in size. They're currently investing out of a $3.5 billion fund and
Gosh.
makes it a little more complicated to do small, real early stage investments. It's a sort of familiar story in the industry. But, I quite literally grew up there. They're my good friends. And, now I'm fortunate to say co-investors in some things. So, I started thinking about it, and it really actually almost started in this room because I'm sitting in my son's room, which is where I spent a lot of COVID on Zooms like this. Um, and I had some friends in the industry who had left in the past and started their own things. And so I was getting some encouragement from them. And then finally kind of got around to doing it. I think both because I wanted to work on the earliest stages.
Mhm.
And, I think also working with amazing founders for 20 years, gives you a little bit of your own entrepreneurial itch to scratch. So my founder journey isn't exactly the same as the founders I work with, but I think there's a lot of similarities and some differences too. But um, so then I left Battery in summer 23, took some time off, and then Encoded was up and running and made its first investment about 18 months ago.
Oh wow. And I love that you mentioned that you had wanted to focus on working with early stage founders and startups. And I would love to hear the reason why, if you're comfortable sharing just what inspired you to work with those at that stage ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, where my passion has always been. At Battery, I did, a number of seed deals or sort of the old school Series A's where, you didn't have a million in ARR, you just had a team and a product. Um, and of course, Battery also does a lot of growth investing, and I helped some of the other partners there work on some of those deals and would apply more of like a technology and market lens to them. Um, but it's really about that feeling you have after you meet a great technical founder, right? You come away from that meeting, you kind of have butterflies in your stomach, you're excited, you're thinking about the next two people you're going to call to tell them about it and dig into it. And I wanted to have that feeling more,
Yeah.
and have that be kind of my main focus.
Mhm.
So at this point, I've done made 13 investments, and all but one were in the sort of first money in round, seed, pre-seed, inception, whatever you want to call it. But first
Mhm.
first checks in. So truly the beginning of the journey for all these companies.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a really good point that it's like you see and feel the excitement that these founders have, and being able to be a part of that journey just from the very beginning, I imagine makes things look differently in terms of your involvement as an investor, and you probably have a different experience than what it's like with later stage founders.
Yeah, I think so. And it's also different than sort of what my experience is. There's a great line that I blatantly ripped off from Founder Collective, which is that I want to be my founder's favorite uncle and not their parents. My fund model is to do 20 something deals in this fund, so it would be very difficult to be parents to 20 companies. But I mean to say I'm not usually not the largest investor in the round. So they have someone in the pseudo parental role. And I can be there for them to help support with technical and customer intros and just be a good sounding board for them who both on technology and market stuff and then there's general company building stuff since, I've been around a while. I've seen a bunch of movies. Um, and so, I want to be in the inner circle with my founders. But of course, that's like something you have to earn. It just doesn't come by right of making an investment. So I'm on WhatsApp with them and, texts and everything. So they know how to find me for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And I also am curious about what inspired you to focus on cloud data and security infrastructure as well, because I know that's the really your core of what you're doing at Encoded and the types of startups you're investing in.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. It's all the nerd stuff in the back rooms and data centers that most people don't come into contact with every day. Um, my first job out of college at Yankee Group was sort of I'm a liberal arts undergrad. I don't have a deep CS background, but Yankee Group was kind of my liberal arts education in the late 90s and early 2000 sort of web and telecom boom about, you know, how the internet works, who's building it, what machines are they buying to build it, how do they operate those machines, networking protocols, and all sorts of fun stuff like that at a time when all that was sort of exploding, sort of in a way that a lot of the AI infrastructure is exploding, over the past couple of years. And so, I was just attracted to it. I kind of liked understanding the fundamental, like, how does this work? Um, I'd always, spent a lot of time on computers, used them mostly for playing games, and showed up at college in 1994 and got a modem. So I was messing around on the, proto-internet of that era, but, wasn't a developer or in any seriousness. Um, but it's just always been the thing that's attracted me that I've been most excited about. And of course, over time, one of the best parts about working in this field is that there's always new technology. Value is always kind of moving around up and down the infrastructure stack. And so over my career, I've invested in semiconductors and silicon, networking and storage, and then lots of, cloud infra and observability software, data and AI technologies, cyber. So as I say, I invest in modern software infrastructure, no software for marketers, no software for dentists, no climate, no crypto, um, just a good old-fashioned plumbing.
Yeah. And I would love to hear any portfolio companies that you've really enjoyed working with throughout the past year. I'm sure, of course, you're not picking any favorites, but any that you've been really excited and thrilled by to work with their support and their success.
Yeah, well, I was very fortunate that my let's see, Atero was my fourth investment. Um, Ended up, which was a company in Israel, and I did a lot of work in Israel in my time at Battery. Would go there a couple times a year, and so I had a lot of relationships there. Um, and Alone was a founder who I had met at his last startup. Um, it was one of those situations where you like the founder more than you like the idea. And so we ended up not investing in that one, but stayed in touch with him. And then got very excited about his new venture called Atero. And then that one had a very quick exit to a large private company called Caruso, who's sort of at the center of the GPU tornado, helping build data centers for OpenAI and Oracle and Microsoft. So that was anomalous, and that was a very quick exit. Generally, since I'm investing in companies at the earliest stage, that journey will more typically be, 3 or 5 or 7 years or more. But it was a great outcome for the founders, a nice one for me, and now I get to be part of them as they continue to build their software inside Caruso.
Mhm. And I think what's really interesting and also really great about that is you mentioned that you weren't interested in the founder's first venture or previous venture, but you really liked the founder overall. And I think that's an important reminder for any founders listening to this episode is that if a VC isn't exactly excited by your current startup idea, that doesn't mean that they're written off completely from anything you might build in the future. So I love that you mentioned that because I think it's a really important piece.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very long-term relationship game. For me at the seed stage, I think about it more as a people business than a company business.
Mhm.
If your company exists and you've raised a bunch of money, you might be appropriate for Battery and their peers, but not appropriate for me, in what I'm doing today. And so it's, yeah, identifying and building relationships over often long period of time, years, with people you think are exceptional and have sort of a unique insight, and hoping to be there when they decide to get going with something new, or sometimes even help them think through what something new should be, the shape of the product, put them in touch with people who look like customers in the future when they have a product to kind of start doing some of that key product, kind of product design, product architecture, validation, things like that. That part I really enjoy. And I actually got to do that, sort of basically help incubate from inception a company that I invested in called Datum, which was a two founders who are actually twin brothers, who I had worked with in the past at Battery. I'd backed their company called Packet, which was acquired by Equinix, the big data center provider, and we became close. And as they were sort of thinking about what to do next, we had a group Slack channel long before the company, was incorporated, and went on some road trips to New York and the Bay Area to sit down with people and get a sense of their both technical and business problems. It's not worth doing the company if it's only a technical problem. It's got to be a technical problem that has a business impact. And so we tried to hone in on that together. And uh, I co-led the seed round there. And then they were actually just fortunate to raise a round from a former colleague from Battery who now is at CRV. And so it's a lot of fun. It's kind of a little mini reunion.
Yeah, totally. And I know you mentioned that earlier in the episode too, that you do still partner with Battery in some sense. And I'd love to hear more about that because I think that's great to have that collaboration when the opportunities come up.
Yeah, we quite literally grew up together. So we've co-invested in one company together. Again, we're with a group of founders who we had backed in it. With my partner at the time, Scott Tobin, who's in Israel, a company called Guardicore, which was in network security, and we're involved with them from when it was five guys in a leaky basement in Tel Aviv through, creating the product, growing the business. Ultimately, kind of a Boston tie, that company ended up getting acquired by Akamai. And then as they left and decided to do something new, which is called Tensai. Certainly Scott and I knew I wanted to work with them. We both wanted to work with them, even though he's still at Battery and I'm at Encoded, and we kind of made that work. And so they announced quite a large, actually, seed investment from Battery and Greylock and a number of angels and a little piece from me.
That's great. This is a little bit more of a broad question, but when a startup that's in the space of cloud data or security infrastructure is potentially looking for an investment from you, what are some things that you would be looking for? Like to you, what makes a startup investment worthy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I really hone in on the founder's, experience. Usually the problem they want to solve stems from some uh, experience or issue that they likely have felt firsthand, maybe at a prior point in their career. So it's kind of that unique insight that they have because they felt it firsthand. And then, the other thing would certainly be that they've spent time out in the market, sort of engaging with potential customers to really then validate that pain. Um, and that's something that I'll help do in due diligence, but also hopefully they've done some of kind of before they get to me. Because really, that's kind of the fail. I've been doing this a long time. Yeah, I kind of reflect on the companies I was involved in or saw that, didn't turn out as well as we had hoped when we made the initial investment. And usually it's not because like you told me you were going to go do something and doing that thing was impossible. Usually we can figure that out in diligence or, you don't really get those kind of pitches. It's usually more like that, you built something and it was number five or six on the priority list of the potential customers instead of, number one or two. And so while you may have been definitely solving a valid technical problem, it didn't have that translation into the kind of business side of things. And so I think that's very important, especially with, I work almost exclusively with technical founders, so sometimes they have much less exposure, sometimes to customers or the sales process, and that's something that I help them think through.
Yeah, and I think that is a really good benefit that you offer there is being able to support people who might not have that experience of the business side really with things that are important for being able to grow a startup and take it off the ground, like with what you mentioned, customer support and marketing and all of that stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about all the quotes that I've stolen in this podcast, but I'm told there's a quote by Michael Bloomberg, which said he knew more about trading than the IT guys and more about IT than the trading folks. And so I kind of parrot that and say I know more about technology than the business folks and more about business than the technology folks. And
Yeah.
that's kind of my lane.
Definitely. And when you had started Encoded, I'm curious to hear what that was like of just going off and doing your own venture fund, especially for anyone who's listening who is in VC and potentially is starting their own fund. Would love to hear your advice and what you've learned along the way.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of lessons learned. I was fortunate to be able to call on other VCs I know for thoughts and advice and just recommendations of vendors, what bank to use, what lawyers to use to help set up. There's a lot of this that I didn't have exposure to before, so it was, new to me. Um, and so then there's the whole fundraising process, which again, I didn't have a lot of exposure to in my prior life. And so certainly trying to raise money will give you a new amount of empathy for the journey your own founders are on when they're trying to raise money. So I think advice wise, I would say, certainly just, I was not focused on raising the biggest possible fund. And I kind of had in my head, like, what is the smallest possible fund? Sort of in the same way a company has a minimum viable product. Like, what's the smallest number I need to hit in order to just start? And then good things will happen, hopefully. And so I had sort of that number in my mind on my little spreadsheet. And I knew like once I hit that, I was going to get going, and I was fortunate to get higher than that. But I think just getting going, staying sort of in the game, right? You can't sort of just disappear for 2 years, not be in deal flow and relationships. So that was kind of important to me to try and do it as fast as I could. Um, you know, get some good lawyers who have set up small funds like yourself, like mine before. I had never done the legal side of any of the fund formation, they call it, is the term of art, or even setting up the bank accounts. Like, I screwed up. Shockingly, the forms are still paper, and I screwed them up more than once. And so that, was a little humiliating, but ultimately got there. And that overhead is real. But a lot of it is kind of in the getting going phase. And then once you're going, the overhead until you have to start fundraising again, which I probably won't do for a year or so. Um, the quarter to quarter overhead of reporting on the companies and things it's not as bad as I was expecting it to be, or as I was told it might be, or maybe I just was expecting the worst. Um, and of course, I'd gotten this advice from somebody who started their own fund that, you know, it's your overhead and it's most of the work is fun, and if it's what excites you, then you're not you're not too upset about doing it. It just comes with the territory.
Yeah. And I love what you shared there about the reminder of just being involved so closely in relationships and kind of like staying in the loop where even things might not be happening or there might not be much movement going on for months at a time. That was a really good piece that you shared there about just like still being in the weeds, so to say, and making sure that you're involved.
Yeah, and I tried to do that through, I made there was more or less a year sort of between when I left and when I made the first investment at Encoded. So yeah, I made a few small angel investments in projects that I was excited about, kept looking at things. Obviously, it was very clear with founders like where I was in my process and all of that. Um, but yeah, I think ultimately the bread and butter, the lifeblood of any venture capitalist is, deal flow, and that's not something you just want to take a long hiatus from.
Absolutely. And since you're so closely in the day-to-day and in the weeds of the areas of cloud data and security infrastructure, what trends do you see happening in those industries and sectors currently that you think could be really big for the next year?
Yeah, of course. We can't have this chat without talking about AI related stuff. The investment that I mentioned before, Atero was very core software helping people run those LLM infrastructures more efficiently. And so I have kind of a set of investments that are like that, like horizontal software technology that enable enable more efficiency out of, the massive scale computing we're doing now. And then a set of things that I would call more applied. So, you know, using modern code gen and AI techniques to help make an existing workflow or job function more efficient. So, for example, the job of a database administrator, or the job of a performance tuning engineer, or the job of a SRE or DevOps professional, operating a large website, or things like that. So those are areas. Tensai is doing the same for penetration testing, which is usually an outsourced security service, but is now enabling the machines to kind of do that in a more automated fashion with sort of the expert guidance that they have in their head from their experience and they can provide to it.
Mhm.
Um, so those are kind of some of the areas I've been focused on. This theme of compute efficiency up and down the stack is something that I've spent time in the past in sort of different contexts, in cloud and observability for kind of traditional workloads. And then now you see it sort of playing out in a, somewhat analogous. The details are a little bit different in the new GPU build, but something I'm definitely very focused on.
And what else would you say is coming up for you and encoded in the next year? Anything that you're excited about or working on that you're able to share?
Yeah, I just made a couple new investments. One on the first day of the work day of the new year. So that was exciting. That would be my actually second one in the UK. So I'm stage and domain focused, but very geography agnostic. So um, I have 4 or 5 companies in Israel, a couple of CEOs in London area, but New York, Bay Area. I did my first Boston deal, which hasn't been announced yet at the end, just before the holidays. So I was excited for that too, because I live here and there's plenty of smart people, um, and it's a security company and there's a great security talent ecosystem here. So I was excited to put some points on the board for Boston too.
Yes, and as someone who's also based in Mass, I am especially an advocate for that, of getting more eyes on Boston because there's a lot of cool things happening there.
Yeah, for sure. There's so many in my domain, obviously in other domains too, but in my domain, great nexus of talent in cybersecurity,
Mhm.
in data infrastructure, all of the big web scale folks, Amazon, Google, Meta, have large engineering sites here. So there's tons of talent. And you know, I'm not trying to be a Boston fun, but also I want to have as much home field advantage as I can too, and don't want to miss anything that's exciting and local.
Totally. And so, in addition to that, because I'd love to go more down the Boston route, what
Sure.
do you love about tech in the city specifically? Sometimes I feel like Boston gets written off compared to other cities, but I'd love to hear why you enjoy it and where you see it really thriving.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's home. I grew up in Providence. I live in Greater Boston. At Battery, we were fortunate to be a part of many great Boston, iconic companies, Akamai, Wayfair, ITA Software, which Google acquired. If you ever use Google Flights, that's them. Um, and so it's obvious to me, aside from the great universities, that there's plenty of technical talent. Something I've seen that's very interesting, or I think is interesting in the past like years, I have many friends from the Bay Area whose kids are, now coming here for college. So I got a text this morning from somebody who said, I'm dropping my daughter at Northeastern, do you want to have coffee tomorrow? And so I think kind of capitalizing on the, academic ecosystem, of course, trying to keep um, more technical founders here. And I will say, I was in the Bay Area for the first part of my venture career. When I moved back in 2008, there was not nearly as vibrant community of real early stage investors in my domain who are willing to invest in kind of founders at this, extremely early stage.
Mhm.
And so as I look back, over the years, that has clearly changed to the positive. And so obviously there's capital, there's good people, there's no reason we can't, continue to build outstanding companies. And I get sort of less caught up in the, oh, we should have been Silicon Valley or is New York ahead of us now? Like there's plenty of smart people in lots of places. But we should take advantage of the ones we have here.
Definitely. I think that's a perfect way to phrase it. And for anyone who's listening to this episode who is newer in their VC career, what advice would you give to them for being able to grow their career based on what you saw for yourself and what led to your success?
Yeah, I think when I started Battery, my job was to call companies, right? And see a lot of companies and be somebody in the back of the room when lots of investment decisions, are made. And then I was there long enough to see how some of those turned out, both the ones that turned out amazingly well and some not as well as we'd hoped. So I think just kind of getting the reps, talking to as many founders as you can. Um, to kind of build up that there's both pattern matching and intuition. Lots of people say VC is a pattern matching business, which I think there is some truth to, but you can also be kind of stuck and constrained by patterns you've seen in the past, and not be open to new ideas. So I try and balance that. Um, and as you grow and do this job more, you'll hone in your filters. Somebody I worked with used to say you should have a very low bar for the first meeting and a very high bar for the second meeting with the founder. And you'll learn kind of how to move that filter around, with some experience. And then, yeah, to our earlier point in the conversation, it is a long-term business. It's a very people-centric business. It's a big industry, but it's also actually, shockingly small. And so the relationships that you have and make, in the early part of your career will progress, their careers will progress, they'll end up doing amazing things. So, you gotta hold on to collect a set of great people and you'll all progress together. And whether they ultimately start something or not, who knows? Maybe they'll be at a big company that could be a potential acquirer, could be running infrastructure at, the next huge SaaS company in town. And so, yeah, just kind of building and maintaining those long-term relationships, and getting out of the office. We were big, big fans of that. I'm a big fan of that, though I'm sitting at home today. So perhaps I'm being a little hypocritical. Get out, go to conferences, just, we can meet people in person, That's really the way to kind of do things and establish long-term connections.
Yeah, love it. Community really is big, so I really appreciate that you put such an emphasis on that because it can do so much.
Yeah, it's definitely vital. You kind of think about your tribe of people that you want to carry with you, and you're always wanting to keep adding people to that. And sometimes people fall out, and the things you're interested evolve and change as technology evolves and changes. But chances are chances are you had good intuition, and they'll evolve and change into areas that you're interested in too.
Definitely. And now for a fun question, I always love to ask our guests to give a shout out to anyone in tech who's doing something that they really admire right now. So it could be a founder, could be another VC, community builder, really anyone is fair game.
Yeah, I'm a solo GP, right? So it's just me. And I have another friend. We have two investments together. Will Lehman, who's also a solo GP at a firm called Step Function. We're kind of fishing in the same ponds. And we've done a couple of deals together. Hang out, sort of have a standing hang every couple of weeks, both you know, to not just be alone in our little offices, to talk about deals and business, and also to have someone else who's kind of going through a very similar journey,
Mhm.
together has been great. And so he'd be great addition to the podcast.
Awesome. I love that. Alex, this has been such a good episode, and I've so enjoyed having you on the show to share everything that you've done throughout your time as a VC and what you're doing now at Encoded. And I'd love to have you share with our listeners where they can find you online in case they'd like to connect.
Yeah, well, I'm just Alex at encoded.vc. You can find me on LinkedIn. Find me on X. I don't tweet that much. And if you're into pictures of manhole covers, you can track down my Instagram where we take pictures of telecom infrastructure.
Perfect. And I'll include those places in the show notes that our listeners can easily find you. But thank you so much again for coming on Built and Backed.
All right, thanks. It was a lot of fun.